Health is an eternal topic for mankind. We are born on Earth, and our health is intimately linked to the environment and ecology. The environment is the basis for human survival and development, and every subtle change in the environment will eventually have an impact on biodiversity, ecosystem, and our health. Exploring how the environment and ecology affect our health in the past, present, and future is the mission of Eco-Environment&Health. Eco-Environment&Health is a journal initiated by prestigious scientists with a strong editorial board, including multidisciplinary scientists from all over the world. With the support from EEH, you will have a better publication experience. EEH has its own offices of publishing, language, design, and broadcasting. The experts will accompany you like an harmonious band and spare no effort to sublimate your valuable scientific research into a magnificent and impactful masterpiece. We have a dedicated center for decision making that deeply integrates informatics, ecology, and environmental science. It explores global research hotspots, predicts discipline trends, monitors the influence and dissemination of publications, and supports the journal's smart decision-making. Upon receiving your submission, our assistant editors will contact you immediately and keep you informed of the manuscript status throughout the entire process. The 14-day rapid peer review will make the publication of your research one step ahead. Your distinguished work is worthy of being known worldwide. We will promote your research globally in a three-dimensional manner through various social media platforms. In addition, the open access fee will be waived for the first 3 years, making your research easier to be read and cited by your peers. We continue to explore and innovate the service strategy of the journal. EEH leads ecology and environment to a healthy future.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Yang from the Chinese University of Hong Kong. I would like to thank Dr. Li for the invitation and the EEH Journal to organize this talk and provide this opportunity. My topic today is on environmental heavy metals and the risk of diabetes and CVD. Okay, let's start. First of all, I would like to declare that I have no conflict of interest. My presentation will include the following sections, including human exposure to environmental matters and diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. And I will discuss proposed biological mechanisms as well as talk about the research gaps and future work. So first, let's begin with human exposure to environmental metals. Heavy metals include toxic metals such as arsenic, cadmium, and lead, mercury, and it also includes some essential trace metals such as copper, as well as nickel and zinc. We can see.
Excuse me, Mr. Yang.
Hello.
Your slide is not open, please.
Slide is not. Oh, wait a moment. We can see. So I already shared my screen, right? Let me double check. Wait, already. Wait a minute. So now you can see my slides?
Yes, it's okay.
I just try one. Let me try. So now it's okay, right? right here. Yeah, next. Okay. So as we can see, this figure shows the position of heavy metals in periodic tables, and for heavy metals, it's our well-known environmental pollutants due to their toxicity and longevity in the elastomer and ability to accumulate in the human body, where by accumulation, and most heavy metals occur naturally, and heavy metals can become strongly toxic by mixing their different environmental elements such as water, soil, and air, and the humans can be exposed to them through the food chain. Most of toxic heavy metals are common in industries. Exposure to environmental metals remains substantial because of rapid industrialization and urbanization that have caused heavy metals to become a major concern for human health. However, the metal levels are reduced remarkably during the past 2 decades. Research from the U.S. National Health Nutrition and Examination Survey showed that a marked reduction in population to exposed to heavy metals, largely reflecting large-scale public policies such as on tobacco control, smoking, and the reduction of air pollution. For example, this slide shows the reduction exposure to lead and cadmium corresponding to the decrease in CVD mortality rate in US, decreased by 43% from 1988 to 2004. Our recent study based on enhanced dataset also observed that overall blood and urine cadmium decreased in the past 20 years with 6 specific patterns. We can see here, this is the figure showed the blood cadmium level, and we can see there are men relatively had low levels compared with women, but this is the similar pattern were observed for urinary cadmium levels. And here are patterns on trends in blood cadmium by with or without established comorbidities. People with established CVD, CKD, hypertension, and cancer had high blood cadmium levels. Compared with people without established those comorbidities, please note that those patterns and associations between metal levels and the mobility are only hypothetical because it did not the cause inference at its cross-sectional nature of analysis. The above evidence are made from the high-income countries. However, limited metal exposure data is available in populations from low and middle income countries, particularly for the long-term exposure data. Here, for example, in this study, we compared the levels of several metals commonly exposed in US and Canada population, as well as in Chinese general population and metal exposed occupational workers. Compared with US or Canada general population, Chinese general population had about 3 times high of urine arsenic levels and 20 times of copper levels and 2 times high of urine nickel levels. If compared with Chinese occupational workers, including this is 2 large available data observed in the occupational workers in Chinese patients, and Chinese population, we can see it's much higher than in US general population. So let's see about how environmental heavy metals infect the risk of diabetes. Here is the diabetes diagnosis. The criteria for diagnosis of diabetes including fasting glucose, HbA1c, and 2-hour OGTT. But in most epidemiology studies, diabetes were commonly identified by FPG and self-reported history of disease. And the latest IDF estimated that about 1 in 10 adults were infected by diabetes. In 2021, over 90% are type 2 diabetes. And over 3 in 4 adults with diabetes live in low and middle income countries. And 1 every 5 seconds, death is due to diabetes. And of course, diabetes is a cost disease. And in China, we can see here, the latest data show that the prevalence of diabetes is about 12%. But here we can see for pre-diabetes, the prevalence is over 30% in China mainland. Diabetes is a complex disease, and we know many factors contribute to the development of diabetes. Compared with traditional risk factors such as dietary and lifestyle, the impact of environmental chemical, particularly heavy metals, on diabetes development is still much under-researched, and their effects possibly underestimated. So we can say by the end of 20th century, particularly in the past 5 years, growing studies and evidence had started to link environmental chemicals, including heavy metals, to chronic disease, including diabetes, CVD, and obesity. Among those heavy metals, arsenic got special attention since the first publication from Taiwan researchers in 1994. This is the first one study reports the cross-sectional association between arsenic exposure and prevalence of diabetes. And until 2011, we can see the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services organized a workshop to systematically review the role of environmental chemicals in development of diabetes and obesity. You might notice that arsenic was the only one heavy metal included in this workshop. And the workshop had concluded that increased evidence supporting arsenic may be related with development of type 2 diabetes, but the debate is still going due to limited prospective data. For other heavy metals, the evidence is extremely limited. For example, until 2015, the first study formally evaluated the cross-sectional association between urine nickel and the prevalence of diabetes in Chinese adults. And we can see this is a cross-sectional association analysis. And in 2015, we also report the cross-sectional association in metal exposure to occupational workers. In 2016, enhanced data showed that heavy metals are associated with insulin resistance, even at relatively lower levels in the US general population. The researchers record further prospective studies on this topic should be further investigated. So we recent hour conducted a series of systematic review and meta-analysis, including about 94 studies in more than 10,000 publications, include the 90,000 T2T kits and 4.5 billion participants. We can see this table can summarize the included study in this meta-analysis and the port association in each metals with risk of type 2 diabetes. We can see arsenic, magnesium, and zinc are most studied methods on risk of type 2 diabetes. We also identified some methods are associated with increased risk of diabetes. And we also estimated the dose response association between heavy metal and the risk of type 2 diabetes. For environmental methods and the risk of CVD, globally, CVD is leading cause of death. Based on the recent trends, cancer may support CVD as the leading cause of death in most countries. But data from the largest GBD study also supports the decreased trends in CVD death rate in the past 10 years. However, CVD still is a major disease burden globally. This slide, we can see major modifiable risk factors of CVD include cardiometabolic risk factors such as lipids and blood glucose, lifestyle, environmental, and social risk factors. We can see air pollution is one of the major drivers for CVD. Here is one meta-analysis on those 5 heavy metals with risk of CVD, CHD, and stroke. The data showed that exposure to some heavy metal is associated with an increased risk of CVD and CHD. And also pointed out those findings reinforced the importance of environmental matters in cardiovascular risk beyond the rule of conventional risk factors. Additionally, we also summarized the potential biological mechanism and the research gaps in this review paper on heavy metal and cardiovascular diseases. If heavy metal exposure indeed increase T2D or CVD risk, then how do they affect the risk? The current literature does not seem to allow us to draw a definitive conclusion, but here the link of heavy metal to diabetes or CVD is biological plausible based on laboratory studies. Here in this review paper, we summarized the following potential mechanisms in linking heavy metals to T2D and cardiovascular diseases. Now we can see first some toxic metals induced oxidative stress directly damage pancreatic beta cell, and we can see additionally this also affect insulin gene activities, some heavy metals. Thirdly, some essential metals at lower level may play an important role in glucose metabolisms. Additionally, we include essential metals at lower level may have interaction with toxic metals and then reduce the risk of diabetes and CVD. Additionally, imbalanced essential metal adverse affect isolated cell functions. For example, zinc at lower level, it may be a key in maintaining the pancreatic cell function but if with low or high levels, it may be play a toxical effect. Additionally, toxic metals compete the essential metals for physiological function and infect type 2 diabetes. Includes zinc deficiency as well as including the body will using the cadmium and lead instead of zinc. Lastly, the heavy metal may increase the risk through endocrine disruptions, include different heavy metals. Here I list 5 metals, and in the we summarize the review paper. We can discuss the detail about each metals and through the endocrine disruptions. Heavy metal may also infect diabetes risk through body weight changes. There are some study reports that those heavy metals could cause weight change and obesity, obesity, and in fact, as well as lipid metabolisms, and cause high, for example, cause high food intake, high body weight and body fat, and high insulin response. Finally, I would like to talk about research gaps and future work directions. First, most previous study or cross-sectional studies, as we mentioned earlier, exposed to heavy metals may electively infect the kidney function. That may cause biased results when we estimate the association of heavy metal levels in both blood or urine with risk of cardiovascular metabolic diseases in cross-sectional studies. Second, most studies relied on self-reported diabetes or CVD. For example, more than 30% of all kids were underdiagnosed in the US population. And those studies relies on self-reported cases could cause misclassification of disease status and further attenuated estimate biased estimate their associations between heavy metal and the risk of diabetes. Third, most studies focused on individual metals rather than joint effects of multiple metals. For example, some essential metals are recommended as potential beneficial supplements for prevention of diabetes. The advanced statistical methods are also needed to develop to address the following questions. For example, which individual metal might be driving the increased risk of disease, and developing statistical methods to deal with multiple exposure, including their overall effects and the specific effects, as well as dose response relationships and the interactions among those heavy metal mixtures. Here is I list some examples. For example, first, the most commonly used methods were conventional statistical models such as linear and the logistic regression model adjusted for other metals as well as potential risk factors. Some supply-based methods are also used for estimate their dose response relationships. In this paper, for example, we used the logistic regression model to estimate the association between heavy metal and elevated blood glucose in cross-sectional analysis of occupational workers. And in another paper, we using the linear regression model to estimate the association between heavy metal and blood glucose, as well as their dose response relationships. Those results showed the way to present the results in the previous studies. However, as mentioned earlier, estimation and the quantification of those high impact of chemical mixtures in epidemiology studies is a challenge. The conventional methods are limited to handle high dimensional and correlated exposures, as well as to address their joint effects. Recently, particularly in the past, I think past 5 years, some new and innovative methodologies are available in environmental epidemiology. for example, some machine learning based algorithms and allow us to address those research gaps, including to estimate the individual and the overall effects, as well as to estimate their linear or non-linear relationship and those response associations and their interactions between those toxic metals and essential transmitters. In this, for example, in this figure, we try to identify main effects of urine metals with risk of type 2 diabetes using the enhanced data set. And we're using the different machine learning based model to identify the overall effects and the main effects, as well as the specific effects with different direction to estimate the metal mixtures, as well with their risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Additionally, because diabetes is a more complex disease, and there are very besides the environmental and well-studied with no risk factors, there are very few studies investigate their like the interactions between social determinants with the risk of type 2 diabetes considering the heavy metals. In this paper, our collaborators estimated the immediate effects of metal mixtures in association between socio-economic status and self-related health status among US adults. I think this is as well as study, as well as to address the non-linear association between exposure and response relationships and their interactions. Additionally, there are very few studies and the data limited genetic data to expose to estimate the heavy metal and exposure and the risk of type 2 diabetes and CVD. For example, MR analysis using genetic data could provide more reliable insights into the cause association between heavy metal exposure and the type 2 diabetes. But based on our literature review, there are very few studies and very limited genetic data available for those heavy metals. In short, current epidemiological studies on heavy metal and the risk of diabetes and CVD are much understudied and are in very early stage. For example, change the life course of diabetes and CVD is for example, here from the early life to child and the reproductive age, and as well as to the adults and beyond. So, but currently most studies are focused on environmental exposure and the prevalence or incidence of diabetes, CVD, or GDM. And there are more additional in other parts. There are some studies also focused on the GDM, like the early environmental exposure and the risk of adverse birth outcomes. But there are very few studies focused on like the progress of diabetes. If individuals already diagnosed with diabetes, what's the impact of these heavy metals on like the treatment effects or on the on progression from disease from diabetes diagnosed to the complications. And additionally, for the early interventions, there are very few studies also address the early intervention observation from the heavy metal, how to intervention and prove the heavy metal and the risk of diabetes. So here is a quick summary. Environmental heavy metals, diabetes, and CVD are major public health problems worldwide, and heavy metal exposure and a risk factor of diabetes and CVD is a biological plausible, and the limited data on joint association of metal mixtures and limited data is available, particularly in high exposed general populations or occupational populations. So the targeting prospective research studies in occupational exposed population may be a practical and cost-effective approach in the future studies. Finally, I would like to thank my supervisors and our collaborators from the Brown University and the London University, as well as my colleagues and collaborators. Thanks for your time, and the questions are welcome. Thank you.